All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you're in the right session, thinking in Flex. But I'll attempt to kick this off and just give you some relevance and perspective on the way I think and the sort of deals and the kind of environment I operate in. But essentially, if you look at the IT market at the moment for consulting, your average rates for a day rate consultant is somewhere between 600 to 2,500 AUD a day. Varying roles and varying skill sets depending on the where that person's being implemented in. A full-time employee in an organisation generally ranges from 50k to 110 up to 150 and 200k depending on the role again which they operate. Projects generally operate on an AR day, but that's never ever respected. IT infrastructure you increasingly find is being outsourced. It's got restricted rights and controls. There's service level agreements that you have to negotiate through. You generally have a development, quality assurance, or user acceptance testing environment, and it's in all states of array and disarray. The IT roles that you traditionally get involved with is that there's sponsors for a project, there's user representatives for projects. You got your project manager, you got your business analysts, you got your architects and your technical and business people, you got your developer pool. There's a mix of full-time employees and consultants, and then there's any given buy-in for any particular project that's going on at any particular time. Then there's the plans, the specifications, the methodologies that all come with that, and there's deadlines for all sorts of phase delivery. It's been done in Microsoft Project. And then you choose your development methodology for any project that you choose. You can choose a waterfall, you can choose iterative, you can choose extreme. This depends on the varying technologies that are out there. And then you have to fit in with the requirements for a centralized, a web-delivered, a packaged application. It has to be browser compatible. It's got to be compatible with internet standards like service, compatible with the actual the organisation's infrastructure. So does it run on their sorts of desktops? Is it Mac compliant? Does it run on Windows? Is it a service-oriented architecture? Does it integrate with any other system? You could be talking to a heterogeneous suite of backends from anything from an enterprise resource management system to a customer management system through to HR or bespoke applications. And does it integrate with Exchange? Does it support corner case client integration in terms of what happens on the desktop? They may have a card scanner. They may have other things. Is it going to be an online transaction, business intelligence type application? Is it scalable? Does it deal with hundreds of thousands of transactions per minute? And then there's the requirements. It's got to be secured, it's got to be authenticated, it's got to support encryption standards, it's got to work against a latest set of databases, it supports single sign-on, it's got LDAP, it's got multilingual, it's multi-currency. This list goes on. What am I talking about? I'm talking about enterprise application development. You've probably heard enterprise flex applications before, but never really kind of appreciated or may have been a part of the process or been touched by the process specifically. Generally, they've built employee or customer-facing applications in order to generate revenue for the company. So they're obviously looking for a return on investment versus their opportunity cost to access a particular market window. So they need this application to be doing something. So it's a well-known, it's well true and tried, it's predictable, and you can estimate the margins on the projects in order to achieve that. And what's the problem with that? The problem is creativity has a timeline of its own. This is something, when you try to involve flex, can cause great difficulty to anyone's project. And I'm sure anyone in this room who's been a part of that enterprise application delivery process, they've worked a project plan, they've worked on requirement specs or created requirement specs, and been able to deliver on that. But when you've started to pick up flex and start working with this application and understand how you're going to use it, you've quickly found out that flex is really a blank canvas. There's anything you can do with this application. So, welcome to Thinking in Flex. What I'm trying to do really here is just impart some consulting back-end knowledge to be able to say to you, I've been there, I've been through the process of building flex applications for multiple clients. Some good stuff, some bad stuff, some indifferent stuff, in order to be able to deliver an enterprise-style application. So that's an application, as I said, it's going to turn a buck for a client, and they're looking for a return on investment with flex. My name's Michael Wise. Mike is my nickname. I'm director and founder of OmniEffect. We're just an information company. What that means is that we build enterprise applications, and we have a particular focus on user experience. We understand how to invoke and integrate existing IT assets, so we know how to integrate with your LDAP and single sign-on, talk to an SAP backend, or talk to an Oracle database and be able to integrate that. We've been in business for about 3 years now. We offer agile consulting services, products and sales. You can buy Flex Builder 2 through us, as well as Flex Data Services as well. We're an Adobe partner, we're an Oracle partner, and also a Microsoft partner. Our focus really on our industries is we talk to financial institutions, manufacturing, some life sciences, media. I've had a lot to do with the media in the UK, building Flex applications. And I've personally been in the industry for about 13 years now. My skills range from object-oriented technologies, Java and .NET. I really started off building C++ applications, and of course now Flex. I saw Flex when it was in its royal days, and I was working for a company called Oracle, and I was researching it as a next sort of generation application, front end for our application delivery. I'm also an Adobe Flex instructor. I've been on all of the courses that they've provided so far, from the remoting, data communications and experience. I've got a blog as well. I've only recently started blogging because people just keep on poking and prodding to get me to talk. So in between whenever I'm not sleeping, I'm writing on the blog. You can also email me at michael.wise@omnieffect.com. So who am I talking to in this room? And I've really started to present the concept of a disciplined developer. Who is that? That's someone whose background and experience is generally it's like a tertiary qualified type person. They've either acquired the knowledge through a continuing or self-education process. They've tried to build it up from online and blog information as much as they can grab. But they've got exposure to the technologies. For me personally, I've had a background in building Oracle Forms applications and quite used to building just master detail style applications. You've probably worked with like some sort of reporting tool. Most of you in the room have maybe written so much SQL you've gone blind. And you've got some idea. You've got some idea about this object-oriented stuff, and you've tried to get involved from any point of view. For most of us who have come across it, it's come from more of a tertiary background, either having experienced it at universities or having read for yourself or self-educated. So I'm kind of trying to define who is it I'm talking to in terms of what sort of applications you're trying to build with Flex and what sort of thinking you must have to go through in order to achieve that. So all of you in the room obviously deal with specifications and trying to interpret specification into some kind of result. You're also perhaps in the organisation championing Flex. You've been in there and you've said, you know, this is a great cross-platform, browser independent, you can rapidly prototype applications with it. It's got a very quick deployment model. It's got nice object-oriented language, so it's got a programming environment that everyone can work with. You know, it's got the power of this new Actionscript virtual machine, which is the Flash player now, and you've got this new name Adobe behind it, so it's an easy sell to bring in such an application to a large organisation. I'm also talking because Bruce Eckel entered the debate about Adobe Flex, and that's very interesting from a Java point of view, because Bruce Eckel's basically the guru. He's the god of C++, Java, continuous integration, best practices. He's written numerous books, and he's highly influential. So he's bringing a whole new group or companion of people into this market with Flex, and that's the Java developer guys. And they're running around looking for some way to present all of their UI very quickly. So the Java guys have had the burn on Swing, and so they're now looking for a way to be able to talk about all the goodness that they built in the back end and be able to present that in the front end. So we're kind of at this crossroads with Bruce Eckel saying the web's a mess. We've got to do something about it. And there's this growing adoption in differing communities around what the Flex application is. So these guys are really disciplined developers that had the experience before, but now they're looking for ways, well, how do I take Flex and be able to use it in an enterprise way? Because I just do, for my day job, an empty depth. I do master detail, I do navigation, I want to be able to enter something in a secured way, I want to have multi-user, I want to do multilingual, I want to do multi-currency. These are things that I want to do. I don't actually want to see another Flickr app in my life. So those are we're right now at the crossroads, and most of these guys are deciding, well, is it going to be Adobe Flex, or is it going to be Java, or is it going to be a .NET, or is it Ajax? And most are deciding that Ajax is probably not going to give them the leverage and the flexibility and the power that they kind of need to be able to bring in, hundreds and thousands of records from a database, allow a user to be able to filter and search that information quite easily in a way that they want to do. And they now understand that there's this new paradigm for them that's called information architecture and user experience, so they can make their applications sexy. So, yes, I'm sort of one of these disciplined developer guys. I'm recommending Adobe Flex, and I like it because my users dislike the page refresh thing. They don't get the back-forward buttons. We kind of see this new Apollo technology being able to take my application and give them a double-click icon, because that's what users see, that's what they think. I'm able to, on my Mac, double-click, get something and go. I know that as a recommender of the technology, I can easily deploy this and make it available and very simple to use. So that's all good, but we open up the Flex builder and we have a look through it, we create the first application, and we stick on a button, and then we get the, oh my god, I've created a button and I'm able to click and get an event, and I got that immediate feedback. It's kind of like golf where you hit good hit and you've gone so many meters to the pin, but if you hit a bad ball, you're instantly, the gratification's not there. That's what Flex Builder's like. It gives you this immediate feel. So if you've been building swing all your life, it takes a lot of effort to be able to get just even the simplest of UI. So the problem with Flex and the ability with Flex is we've got this such broad canvas now to be able to dream up the interfaces. So what you want to know is just tell me what I need to know. I'm going to tell you some of the things here that you probably already get to some point. Some of the people may be in differing or varying levels of research or experience with the application, but I'm going to start kind of like the basics and take you through to where you need to go. Everything within the Flex application is actually built on Actionscript 3. Who in here has actually pulled apart the SDK? One. Everything inside that SDK, if you go and read the source code, has been exposed for you to see. Everything that you see within the Flex application actually was built using that SDK code. So you'll see panels, you'll see buttons, you'll see all the code for the trees, you'll see all the code for the accordion sitting there in Actionscript 3 code. So it's built with these components already pre-ready for you to go, buttons already there for you to use. So in Actionscript 3, what do you need to know? It's an object-oriented language, but everything's an object inside Actionscript 3. In terms of being an object-oriented language, it supports concepts like classes, inheritance, interface. It's got method hiding. It's got the ability to override. It's got the ability to protect methods, and so on and so forth. However, it's not completely object-oriented in the full sense of what Smalltalk and Java are capable of doing, where it doesn't support abstracts and private constructors. The reason for that is because of its compliance with ECMAScript 4. So the idea here is that Actionscript is really trying to completely implement the Actionscript 4 specification, but also at the same time trying to offer enough functionality for people to be able to deliver object-oriented UI. So at the root of all of this technology is this thing called an object. And basically from that, we create our custom components and objects. So here's the thing, right? You've probably been a web developer. Who's like a web developer, done JSP, ASP, Cold Fusion? Give me some Cold Fusion. All right. Thank heavens. Hopefully this makes sense to you guys, because what I'm about to tell you hopefully will get a few pennies dropping in the room, because it's a constant question I bump into. It's a constant mind change that most of the CF people try to get around, because you guys are scripting people, you're JavaScript, you're quite used to the DHTML, using a bit of JavaScript to interrogate the DOM model and then do whatever it is you need to do in order to change it and make it become interesting to use, right? That's a lot of effort. So the whole concept here from kind of like a law talk and university type thing is it's all about declarative programming. The idea here is we're just using XML to realize ActionScript code faster. That's all. That is simply it. So you've got to keep in your mind that everything's an object, and what we have is this high velocity way of using XML to be able to define all of my code automatically for me. So within Flex Builder, it actually generates out all of this code behind the scenes. So when you start creating your VBox and you try to parameterize your VBox, at the end of the day, when you press compile, it's actually generated out all of the ActionScript code. In fact, within FlexBuilder, you can check an option and say, leave that generated code there. It's worthwhile going and having a look and seeing what that actually does. This has no relationship with HTML. Who thought that before? Anyone? Yeah. There's no relationship with HTML in any way, shape or form. So what I've got here is just to dramatically demonstrate this whole concept, is that you're probably used to using the VBox to be able to put something in it so you can vertically align various components. The idea here is that on the VBox, I'm using an attribute called ID, called my VBox. I'm setting an attribute width and I'm giving it 100%. If you didn't see that, you kind of, because the width was 100%, you can't be thinking HTML style of interaction, which is what they're trying to replicate here. In reality, it's creating a variable called my VBox, which implements the VBox class. It instantiates a new VBox using the default constructor, empty. And then on the VBox variable, we're then setting the method or parameter or function called %width equals 100. So that's actually happening for you behind the scenes. So let's take that a bit further, because the next thing you can do in HTML is you can parent. So you can actually sort of create divs and you can have subordinate children of divs. How is that actually implemented within Flex? And that's probably a confusing piece as well. Because this is an object-oriented language, and we've got a serious bit of programming power behind it, the Flex framework itself implements a concept called parenting. And what it does is essentially each object has an array which can store more objects of itself. So it can subsequently parent and child itself. And so when the UI gets rendered, it actually goes through that child tree list, parent-child list, and then starts rendering each of them in turn. So I'll talk about in a few moments how that actually gets translated. But essentially, to give it a name, it's called composite pattern. So if you search around the web and look for composite pattern, you've probably been using already add child, add, remove child, and create remove child, add. So it's just essentially there's an object sitting inside the Flex framework itself, which is managing all of this for us. So that's kind of convenient. So what happens in this case? So if we've got a VBox, and I've identified it with an ID of VBox, and I've set my width, but then I've appended my label. So in reality, it's actually doing var my label, a new label class with the default constructor. Then I'm setting the attribute text, and then I'm giving it a new string called yosushi. After that, I'm creating my VBox again. I'm setting the width, but I'm then doing add child, and I'm sending in the new object. So the concept here is that you have to kind of get your brain around the fact that behind the scenes, it's generating this for you all the time. And quite often, a lot of the bugs that emanate from the compilation process within Flex is because it's doing nasty stuff behind your back that you don't know about. And I'll talk about one of those in a sec. So this now gives us the ability to do this magic thing, which is really quite powerful. It's called component-oriented development. And it allows us to be able to create MXML, which creates XML, which holds XML, which has new objects, and we can create our own little components and be able to parameterize them and get them to do things we want them to do. So there's two basic ways of doing that. One is using just pure XML. So in an XML, you can, within FlexBuilder, under a directory called com company components, myvbox.mxml, and the name is very important. We can create a VBox in that file. We would have had the standard XML pragma header. But here we've got a namespace which is referencing the Adobe namespace to pick up the VBox definition in their manifest. We're setting the width and then we're adding label and VBox. So within my application itself, I can then reference that component by saying application, and then reference the namespace for application to pick up the component. I give it a namespace, I set local, I give it com company components star, which allows me to then reference in the class path where that particular object is, and then it instantiates it all by itself. So it's created me a new my VBox, so it's my own custom component I can do anything with. So if I wanted to, I could set code, I could put script, I could expose variables, I could expose events inside this piece, and then be able to reuse it as many times over and over and over again. So here we are leveraging some of the immediate power of XML because that's a very fast way of doing it. Here's the very slow way of doing it, and if you're kind of like advanced, you probably would get into this way of doing it. I could have done it just as equally as well in Actionscript. So within Actionscript, I could create my VBox AS. Note the path. So I'm actually going from a com company components my VBox. I've had to import the containers so I can actually extend VBox. And inside of the package, I'll go this way because it's like crazy. Inside this package, I then create a default constructor for my VBox. And then I have to implement some strange extension here. I'm trying to override a function in particular called createChild. Why am I doing that? It's because the Flex framework implements this method already, and we inherit it from the VBox itself. So the idea here is that we have to override this protected function. We have to then supercreate the function in front of us, so there's some method hiding, and then I can instantiate my variable label and then add the child to the container of my VBox. That's how it works. Let's go back. There's that, or that. That's why MXML is so important. And it's very different from, you may have heard some discussions around MXML versus XAML, right? So Microsoft's equivalent of the same thing. They're doing pretty much the same thing. However, XAML is very high resolution. Within XAML, you can draw line art. So it's intended for graphics as well. So it's getting something akin to SVG and a programming language inherent into it itself. But the concepts are very similar. They're still implementing like a composite pattern to be able to have this parent-child relationship. They still render the output. They still are all objects at the end of the day. So you can treat them and instantiate them, create them, and then set them or copy them or whatever you need to do. But that's the Actionscript 3 way. After that, you probably want to be able to dispatch events out of this system. So you want to be able to listen to things going on inside your own componentry. So you built your VBox and you got your label, but you want to be able to do something with it. Everything within Flex applications are event-driven. That event-driven nature comes from inheritance out of the Flex API. So deep within the Flex API, there's actually this object called event dispatcher that everybody implements after object. And basically there's an interface on it. But in its essence, it gives you a public method called dispatch event, and that allows you to communicate messaging out of your componentry. That's kind of compelling because it then allows you gives you the ability to be able to listen for specific things, like, for example, a click event on a mouse button, or a click event on a button in particular. So they have this concept of capture and bubbling. So this is where your confusion may come out of the DOM model, because DOM has a very similar event bubbling methodology inside of it. So what they've implemented is a similar type of feature around this message pump system that's been built inside Event Dispatcher. So the idea there is that if you click an object that's deeply embedded within the hierarchy of parent and child of an array of objects on screen, so you've got a VBox, a HBox, a canvas, and you've got a button, you'll actually see the event bubble up. There's a secondary piece to that, is that you can actually stop the event at the next component up, or you can let the event echo right to the top of the stack to MX application, and then work its way back down. So it has like a V-shaped type pattern to it. The idea here is that you should be able to create your own custom events for things. So when you're creating components, and if you go to other lectures on the components and how to generate them, this is in essence the core of it. So you may indeed want to be able to create your own componentry that emits its own events and be able to carry out its own functionality. So that's very important. The concept here is called loose coupling. When you're actually inside your component, you don't actually want to have, you want to expose as many interfaces to it. You want to keep it so that it understands its own data and understands its own positioning and own characteristics, own fundamentals. So when someone else consumes your component, they don't really have to dig down into the internals of it. It's all exposed at the level that they need it. There's a couple of ways of being able to implement events, and one is through metadata sitting inside MXML, so that's the standard way. And here I'm just demonstrating an event called login event. Here I've created my own events.login event. I've extended the event object, and I've just said the name I'm looking for is event. So if I start listening to the event on my particular component, I'm then able to react to that and pick up particular data that comes through the event tree. In Actionscript, you've got a similar method. Here's one I've used for session event and starting sessions. I'm actually listening for creating an event called session start, and then I'm able to see that a session event. So what does that, it kind of looks like on the outside, when you start registering these events in either the MXML or the ActionScript way. So if you think back to our VBox example, on the button you're probably used to dealing with button, and then you get this event called click, and then you apply your handler and you receive the event. So that's the mechanics of it. That's the thinking of how it works, is that they're registering these events and then allowing you to be able to kick them and push them into the pump. How do you listen to them from the other side? The easiest way to do it in ActionScript 3 is just referencing the My button, and then you add an event listener. The button itself implements the event handler, and so you're able to then listen to anything that comes out of your custom component or custom event and be able to react to it accordingly. So everything inside Flex applications is event-driven, which is a real mental change to get into. So you've got to be able to understand, you can make your component, you can make your code and application infrastructure easier by simply going to a loose coupling strategy.
It's probably okay if you're an old performance developer, because that was all event-driven anyway.
Yeah, if you're an old forms developer, you've seen it. If you've done Visual Basic or any of that sort of thing, you kind of get an idea about it. But this is a bit more dynamic. If you've done Swing, this is right up your alley. It's very, very, very similar. Then there's binding, and this is very, very new and something new to think about when you're building your applications and what actually goes on behind the scenes. And this is, again, this is the compiler doing some white man's magic behind the scenes on you. You can do it by, well, 3 ways actually. You can set a bindable attribute. You can actually use an MXML tag called binding, or you can actually use this thing in the actual API called binding utils bind property. What's binding all about? It's really a strange concept where you're able to listen to a change on an attribute of an object over here and be able to communicate it to an object over here. Why would you want to do that? For real-time systems and real-time processing, when you're communicating with a web service, you want to be able to receive that information from the web service and then be able to react to it very easily. So you want to be able to react to changes inside your application very simply. And binding enables that technique. So it's quite new. It's not really sort of widely accepted as a technique, and it's very strange because you're able to set binding on values. You reuse them inside your MXML and reference them, and if you set the value, all of a sudden, you suddenly see on screen the value change. Like, how did it do that? Well, it did it because it had bindable set on it. When you set bindable on it, all it's doing in the background in XML generation is writing binding utils bind property for you. So that's some of the fun. Other major concepts that you've probably already bumped into and quite familiar with is the service-oriented interaction. So, you know, you can talk to HTTP services, you can talk to web services via SOAP, you can use remote objects and data servicing. There's a request-response handling dilemma that's involved there if you've not experienced with it, and there's also Java messaging services through producer and consumer. You've got to remember that your web application, when it sends a request, may or may not get a response back. So when you're building your UI with inside Flex, you've got to understand that you've got to show the user something that it's going on. So a really quick example of that . Just jump onto my blog. A really quick example of that, if I wanted to carry out a search on my blog, I type in Omni, I press search, you notice that I give them some sort of indication as to what's going on. So I've actually made a request out to an object on the internet, and then I've held that animated display for the period of time until the request comes back. I then used the binding in order, when I received the information, it bound that information into an array collection, and then I was able to present it. So it was the change in the array collection state of having data that this presentation then appeared. So that's event-driven, that's the binding, and that's the service interaction all at once. And that's the thinking that you need to start having in order to get busy. So in terms of program flow, what are the different entry points into an MXML application? When you're dealing with MXML, generally you have to come through the event system. You have to recognize an event or listen to a specific event in the creation of that object within inside the Flex application, and then you have your opportunity to do something. There are other ways of doing that. You can use the Actionscript method, and that's, in particular, this piece of code will just simply present to you a blank Flash application. It doesn't actually contain, because it extends Sprite here in this particular case, it doesn't contain any of the Flex API at all. So you can't use accordion, you can't use buttons, you can't use any of the event system. It's just raw Swift. Very good technique for creating your own graphics using this way. You've probably seen Andre Michel. Anyone seen Andre Michel's work? He always works in this way, and it's quite odd, but he still writes ActionScript 3. So he thinks in objects, he's thinking Flex already. So the framework for Flex gives you all of the power. So as I started to begin with, you can come in through the events. So I described these events as initializing, creation, complete. Have anyone played with creation, complete and played with the initialize? And do you understand the difference between the two? We'll touch on that in a second. Basically, the program control that you've experienced so far is that you're able to write this JavaScript type language inside XML. It basically has a very similar syntax to Java, so if you come from the Java world, you kind of get the idea of what the braces are going to do, the program execution and flow control. Something that's interesting that they've implemented is the try-catch exception handling within inside the code as well. So you're able to pick up on any of the errors that may occur and stop that little dialogue from appearing up into the top right-hand corner or left-hand corner when you're running your Flex applications. A great resource is check out the ActionScript cheat sheet blog. Go download it. There's a series of PDFs there. It basically walks you through the entire ActionScript framework, and it lets you get moving coding quicker. So I just touched on object creation with these two events. So creation complete is a specific event from the Flex framework that's telling you when all of the objects in the tree are created. That's your time when you can actually start accessing the objects in your application. At no time before then are you able to do that. So have you ever done a creation complete or done an initialize, wrote some ActionScript code in the event handler and started trying to manipulate your objects within your tree? If you do that, you'll probably get some errors and probably find it's very difficult because the objects aren't created by then, by the time it goes in. So this is again talking to Flex's event-driven. Flex is using all of these events to be able to create the UI in advance, so you're then able to manipulate them and so on. Finally, there's collections. So you've probably experienced an array, but inside Flex 2, the array collection is their brand new object for dealing with heavy amounts of data. The array collection has a great number of facilities on it, from cursor capabilities, so you can pick off a particular record and then cursor through. It's got bookmarking capabilities, so you can bookmark a particular record or bookmark another record. It's also got great filtering capabilities, so you can set filter functions on them and be able to filter out all of your information at once. So the array collection is basically king for managing all of your data, and getting information in and out of array collections is what you spend most of your time doing. Array collection can be created from an array purely, and it's got constructors and methods for doing that. And finally, to complete our concepts, you're really working within the ActionScript virtual machine, which is Flash 9. So Flash 8, forget it. That's the old world. It's got nothing to do with anything that we do. The ActionScript virtual machine and Flash Player 9, if you're not a Flash programmer, which I'm not, I don't know anything about Flash. Scott Barnes was invented for Flash. Basically what they offer for me to be able to integrate further, like with Apollo and with web browsers and so on, they give me native interfaces and they give me external interfaces so I can do web browser interaction. I can live within this nice, comfortable virtual machine world that is the Flash Player. An interesting point about the Flash Player performance is that it's also using just-in-time compilation. So if you're aware of what it's doing, it's getting near machine speed out of the actual virtual machine itself. So the performance is greatly improved. So I'm getting back to the original point. Flex is this blank canvas. It's got no immediate application development framework. You've probably seen Model View Controller and Cairngorm out there, and a lot of debate and discussion around what Cairngorm and Model View Controller do for you. The issue there is that there's no way to do a multi-user, there's no way to really comfortably go out and do a multilingual, multi-resource style application, which we're in the business of building. My day job is doing master detail and putting it out to a company and for them to be able to consume it. The other thing is Flex has a default look and feel. It comes with this halo look and feel. You can use skinning with CSS, and you can create your own assets, and you can do it programmatically within Actionscript. You know what? That takes a lot of time and it's a lot of effort to do, to change the look and feel. So if you're in a project timeline, you're going to experience some hurt by actually going down that path. So getting the most out of your CSS is of great value. The other thing is it doesn't assume the look and feel of the host. So if you're on a Mac, it's not going to assume the look and feel of the Mac. It's just going to run. And that may be a confusing topic for your users in terms of design. However, it's got a heavy emphasis on componentry, and you see a lot of people now trying to bring out these components like page turners, and you've probably seen Doug McKean. Have anyone followed Doug McKean's blog? He's putting out a lot of good components that kind of are useful, like things you would use in a general application, like multiple tabs. He's got a super tab navigator, which you can have multiple tabs and close tabs and be able to do that. That stuff's just not there out of the box. You have to go and create it. But for having multiple tabs in our applications is kind of like we have them as default in Visual Basic. I can do that today. So that sort of thing is what you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about your Flex applications and developing them. So it's at this point it's getting this developer adoption, and there's not a mature discussion about how to be able to deliver enterprise applications with all of the pieces that we want. There's no Gantt. There's incredible charting capabilities, which is a lot of people. But however, even data grid can't be grouped, or there's various sorting issues with data grid itself. Even though that you can drag, drop, and you can sort, that's all good. But it's not as mature as we would probably like it. So again, if you've got a blending of all that technology and componentry on your hosts, for example, on the Mac, they have in-place editing on most of their fields. On the Windows PC, there's no in-place editing. It's to simply directly edit a field. So on the Mac, you've got to click twice to be able to edit something, or depending on the application. On the PC, you just click and you'll be able to access the field. So there's an obvious difference in the interaction design. The other thing is that if you're coming from like a Power Builder or a Forms or a Swing environment, generally you've got ability to do scale. You've got the ability to bring in hundreds of forms, hundreds of modules of functionality. So I'm talking about applications which do general ledgers or do accounts receivables, that sort of thing. Because that's the target where enterprise applications is all about. Adobe's messaging to the partners is with Lifecycle coming on board and new versions of that coming out. That's the market that they really want to get into very quickly, and seeing Flex as the way for doing that. So within Flex 2.1, you've probably seen modules and module loading. Has anyone explored Flex 2.1 and module loading at this point? All right, so with module loading, you're able to write smaller Flex applications. So you've probably used MX application before. Now you can use MX module, and essentially you're able to write a mini application inside of that and have a calling application load the module dynamically, and then on the module loading complete, be able to instantiate and create and use that module. This gives you an ability now to be able to scale your application, so you can have multiple Swifts still sitting out onto your application server, being downloaded by one controllable, callable client. So that gives you kind of a way to go forward. However, out of the box support, there's no real templates, there's no multi-document interface, there's very limited SDI or single document interface control. There's no real concept of a window. They've got a tile window and a panel. If you wanted to make it resize, if you wanted to maximize, minimize it, you've got to do it yourself. Or go to Doug McKean, or go into the blogs and find that information out. So what does that mean in the project time frame? That means time, that means money, and that means you're not going to deliver. So that's a real problem. So when your users come to you and they start talking to you about what they want, what they have in mind, and what the interaction designers have in mind, there's a real impedance mismatch. So with the uptake of the technology, you being able to understand what Flex does at the same time, trying to be able to match what the user specification is and overheads of building a desktop application, that's a real conundrum. So operationally, building Flex applications doesn't really change it. If you're used to a Java development environment, the Java guys go, yes, this is great because we already do this anyhow. It's based on JDK 142. It utilizes J2E containers like Tomcat, JRun, Oracle application, WebSphere, and so on. So essentially, the Flex data service is the thing that allows the Flex application communicate with the host world, the data side. It's actually a jar, it's a war, it's near, and you can deploy it within these application services quite conveniently. Flex Builder 2 is an Eclipse-based tool, you've all heard that before, but it contains the SDK. Go open up the framework source code and have a read. Start reading it now, because that's a good way to be able to learn how to be able to develop your own componentry, what you've got to do in order to have that amount of level of interaction. Go read button, go read panel, go read VBox, and understand how that they're actually implemented. Because everything that you see in a Flex application actually comes from the framework. So it's very easy to get in there and uptake it quickly. That's how I did it. The other thing is that you can use Apache Ant to automate your build process. So whilst you're in the project and you've got a bunch of users, a bunch of developers working on this application, you can use Apache Ant for the process control to be able to compile this application and push it to a target server. So development can use it, so QA can use it, so UAT can talk about it. There's actually on labs.adobe.com, there's like an Ant plugin that you can use to be able to generate your Flex application, your Flex projects very quickly. The other thing is inside a development team, if you've got multiple developers, you're probably using CVS or SPNs, these continuous source control tools to be able to manage and scale the amount of work that's going on at the one time. Operationally, most of us use Xdoclet for generating things. I can only stress and recommend so much, generate as much as you can. If you can generate all of your ActionScript classes using some of the tools, there's a Kangorn tool from a guy called Think Digital that's out there. He automatically creates for you ActionScript classes that make it easier for you to interact with your data services. This Cold Fusion plugin tool is a god. I use it for different reasons. The Cold Fusion plugin tool you've probably seen before, you open up Flex Builder, you implement the plugin, you go browse an RDS service on your Cold Fusion, you go select the table and you select generate whatever. And essentially you can create projects, and it generates whole projects to create master detail and DML type interaction with your database tables already. It's got a lot of example code in there already for doing simple things like double-clicking on something and opening up a window to be able to load that information in. So it shows you very quickly how to get the sorts of applications that we build going fast. And that's from Dean Harmon. He's actually a developer from Adobe. So the approach is that for project management, how do you communicate your design and interest about the project? The best way to do it is using a story card approach, a pictorial business requirements document. Essentially it's saying this is what you're going to get. It kind of combines your interaction design. This is the Flex application you're going to build and how it matches the requirements of the application. It's a great sell technique. On my blog I've got an example you can go and check out various versions of how to use that. It's a good communication tool. The other issue is who's ever tried to estimate a Flex project? Not you. Who's ever tried to estimate a Flex project and found it's horrible? And found, I've got no idea. Yeah.
Yes.
Let me add two things to your project possibilities. Let's talk about rigging, because you can prototype and rig at the same time. Rigging basically means that I can create the application with ropes and pulleys, and I can move the application around without actually having it do anything data-wise. It's a great way to then be able to take to your user community immediately, because I was at the usability session before, loved it to death, but I don't, generally we're working in small teams, our companies can't afford usability testing, and we kind of have to drive off developer UI sensibilities. So what rigging allows you to do is understand, is this thing going to work when we build it? You need to know very quickly, because building a Flex application is very, very slow. Getting in there and setting H-boxes and padding and widths and getting the desired effect with your assets is very difficult. That then completes asset complete. Stick that into your project as well. If you have to put icons, if you have to put imagery, if you have to put anything that represents something, get it done up front. Understand how much of it there is. Can you outsource that stuff? Because you don't want it to be inside your project. And then finally put onto the end of your application development lifecycle a fit and finish process. So that's basically after it's been through the QA UAT process, put fit and finish in there, allocate a certain amount of time and a number of people to really review the process. So how does your project really change? You kind of need people with the roles and the ability to provide interaction design, and be an information architect, maybe all at once, maybe two different people. Basically, the idea there is that someone's thinking up, how is this application going to communicate the sort of data that we need to communicate? How is that going to work? They basically talk with the information architect and they can come up with strategies about what would work well for users to interact with. I'll show an example you may have saw it before when I was setting up about some of those ideas, because there's what developers think, there's what the users think, and there's maybe what a user design person thinks, and they're all three different ideas. And if you're trying to build a project that's got a budget, that's got a certain limited amount of time, an 8-hour day, and all of those other sort of impacting variables, so that's going to really impede on you. So the things that increase in terms of it's a desktop application really comes down to the increased demands of building a desktop application now. You're not building a web application which has got a known navigation, it's got a known look and feel, it's got components that you can quickly rip together very quickly, and assets that you've probably already got. And that's some of the challenges about building large-scale flex applications. The other thing is that you've got to decide to engage the user's workflow. How is it what is it they're trying to do? How do you understand? You're not trying to create the next iPod, and you're not trying to create, the next, Vista, Aero look and feel. You're just trying to get them to do something. So users typically are finding something, they're typically learning something, they're typically performing a transaction, they're either controlling or monitoring, or they're creating and sharing, or just being entertained. That's basically what they're trying to do. So the patterns in which they work inside their application generally is like a self-exploration. They can navigate their way around your application. They can satisfy themselves. So they're trying to do something with the functionality in either of these ways. So information architecture is really about structuring the information in a way that the users need to be able to get it. So they need to be able to just drill into your application in a scalable way. So what sort of things do you have available to you? We've got multi-document interfaces, you've got single document interfaces, you've got tiled panels, 2 panel selectors, 1 window drills, you've got alternative views, you've got wizards to be able to drag the user through particular steps. If you think about the amount of effort now that I'm talking about trying to deliver that sort of information to the user, because that's what the user is expecting a desktop application is going to be like, because they've used desktop applications quite regularly. They know what a web-based application does, but they're quite very familiar with what a desktop application does. They're expecting this sort of interaction, this level of engagement. So that's actually a lot of work. I'll show you an application here. It's basically in 2 pieces. And it just gives you an idea of the sorts of things that I tend to work on. So most of my applications, in some way, shape or form, require a login and authentication. So I'll always present the user with a ability to log on. This particular interface talks with our backend and can communicate to any form of authentication. And in this case, it's just doing an authentication where it's looking up a user in a database and being able to pull that user back. Without logging in and giving away that show, I'll drop the test. So the reality is I build this sort of thing most of the time. I often want a start bar. I want some sort of navigable menu. I want to be able to then drill down through the menus at the same time. I then want to be able to select something. So I might go and browse a set of aircraft here. It might be how that works. Yep. So that's then be able to call that back. So I can drag that around. I can resize it. Now, resizing doesn't exist in Flex. You have to go write that yourself. Right? How much time do you think you could do that in? Right? Are you keeping your job and your project? No. So these are the things that you need to concern yourself when you see this kind of looking UI, right? And I'm going to double click, I'm going to edit that particular thing, and then I'm going off and trying to call it. Hopefully the network's going to play well for me. No. There's the problem again. So I should actually be here showing the user that something's gone wrong, something's happened, because I'm not guaranteed of a connection. So, but on this thing you can use all the good stuff. So I can check for a particular filter. I can look for the Kaladi helicopter. I can then select highlight. Look for the EC range of machines. So that's the thing. That's what you want to do. That's what's in the user's head, right? That you've got to build. You've got to go out there and create that yourself. So it's a very difficult paradigm to get into. The other thing is that the user, whilst they're doing that, they also want to do other things. So they probably want to go in and maintain various users in the system. So they can select the user and bring up their details. Hey, and then be able to scroll it. The other thing that we do in the enterprise world is we track security. We want to know if we want to stop them from controlling a particular field, this, that, and the other. I actually use generation to do this. I use the Cold Fusion generation. It talks to a data service backend. It's all Java on the back end with Hibernate. But I'm a lazy person, so I actually use that to generate to give myself a head start. Any place you can get generation is really, really good. So again, I can use this scalable type of UI to be able to work through that. If you look at things that I've done to this window, I've put like shades and effects and cool stuff. And when you click, it kind of does that Vista go away type thing. So that's the sort of applications that I build. I'm interested in building a lot of those and scaling a lot of those. So when I press the start here and I go and select an option or create a various menu option which is generated from data, I can create as many of these as like, but I can bring these forms in, and these forms are actually loaded through MX module. So these are actually separate Swifts sitting on that application server on our host, and it's just dragging in more information at once. So that gives you two things right there. So the interaction design was I wanted something that was scalable for my users to be able to use. I wanted to be able to give them the ability to highlight, to search and filter. So that's what they do. I then want to give them the ability to double-click, be able to get in there and edit that data pretty quickly. Yeah, it's pretty quick. So I can then make an alteration to that guy, change his contact with someone else, and then save it. But you've got to give them some kind of interaction and feel about what they're doing at any point in time. So that's just giving you an idea of the sorts of applications that we're targeting and that we build. So, nearing completion. Basically, it's about relevance for you guys. It's about keep it simple. It's about exploiting CSS as much as you can. It's about limiting your assets, buying your icons, buying any of your assets to avoid copyright issues day one. Avoid building components. If you go to the components class, don't build them in your project timeline. Don't do it. You'll be sacked or something. Because they're very difficult, they're time consuming, they're difficult to get right first time round, second time round, third time round in control. Targeted portal style application. In Cold Fusion, you use the CF forms. Oh, geez. All right. Uses JavaScript to validate everything. Oh, all right. So what I suggest is that perhaps Flex Builder for you can resolve a lot of your JavaScript validation issues, and you can politely and sweetly use very simple little portlet style applications to augment and enhance the way you deal with your applications in Cold Fusion. Lock in the interaction design first. Really negotiate that, really design it up front first, and keep it simple the best you can. Perform a pre-project discovery process. Understand how big, how deep is this application going to be, because then you can sit back and limit it and phase it and say, well, for the first piece, we're only going to deliver this module, and we're going to deliver it this way with these personas, these use cases implemented. Understand the volume, frequency, the flex trends. Blending HTML and Flex is good. Even though you've got Apollo down the track, that sort of application that I showed you before, quite literally me a lot of time to build, because I'm experienced in the technology. I've been building it for quite some time. If you don't have that kind of experience and ability, then I would suggest a fallback method and choose something very simple and stick to the standards which they provide out of the box. Go for an incremental development, small things more often. Keep that in mind all the time, because you can easily win with the Cold Fusion project, HTML, Flex for your validation and forms, and keep your data integrity that way. And generate as much as possible. Keep it simple. Go with the daily build, daily rush. Take your preview of your application out to your customer and get them to understand, well, this is what it is. It's not a web application that we're building anymore, guys. It's a desktop application, and really get that to be an awareness issue for them. It's okay with inside your rigging to have a little alert that says not yet complete. because that basically puts in place an attention point and seeks an action, and basically for a project planning capability, then you can start estimating, well, how much time is it then to build. Limit your scope creep. Establish the key difference between the web and desktop application environment. Forums, where to get your resources, how to learn more about this, how to enable yourself, because you're disciplined developers. The forums, FlexCode is great. CFlex, if you're not hitting CFlex like every day and then looking at the MXNA or any of the stuff that the guys publish onto that, really good place, constantly changes. The first book I read about Flex was from Iteration 2 called Developing Rich Internet Clients. Great book, excellent. The second book that you might read, if you're a Java person, is from Farata. It's called the RIA book. It's got DAO generation for your database objects. It's an excellent resource, but it's also an excellent resource about Flex. It tells you the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Actionscript cookbook from Joey Lott, excellent book. He talks to you about Flash player things. He talks about how do you do these tricky transitions, how do you do these things which make the UI move and do interesting stuff. That's all great. It's pretty irrelevant to me because my users probably wouldn't notice. But it's an excellent book for being able to write UI code. Finally is Design Patterns and ActionScript. Again, it's Joey Lott and Denny Pattinson. If you're used to writing object-oriented code or want to learn more, because they explain it day one. So the first piece of the book is really about object-oriented code, how to build it, what's an interface, what's a class, what's inheritance, and talks to you about that. Joey and Denny did a very good job. Apart from that, thank you. My blog's available there, my email, and please, dear God, no more flicker apps.